facelift. And when we return, you'll find us each week on your favorite streaming platforms like Roku, Amazon Fire, and Apple TV, as well as continuing to go live on LinkedIn, Facebook, and YouTube. Plus, we'll still be on all the podcast channels. So we're taking just a little break, and we'll launch the new season beginning in early January. And because we wrapped up season 5 at the end of October, we decided to bring back some of our most popular episodes to fill the gap. So if you missed these episodes, it's your chance to catch up on the brilliant insights, practical tips, and heart-centered advice from my guests for women in careers who feel stuck where they don't belong. Now, don't go anywhere because we're going to start this reprised episode in just a moment. Welcome to Tips for the Transition, where we have deep, meaningful conversations about life. We talk about how significant changes like divorce, grief, and career change can affect us, our family, our relationships, and our work, and how to move beyond them. I'm your host, Maria Tomás-Keegan, certified career and life coach for women, and I'm here to support you through the messy seasons of life so you can answer big questions like who am I now and how do I move on from here? If you're ready to consider new options, be inspired, and meet incredible women who are on this life journey with us, you're in the right place. You'll find something in each episode to give you hope and encourage you to move from panic to powerful, from rocky to resilient, and from upside down to right side up. This is Tips for the Transition. Hello, thank you for joining us, and welcome to Tips for the Transition, the Career Roadmap. I'm Maria Tomás-Keegan, your host, and as a coach, a career coach, I help professional women who feel stuck, and together we position them for the career they really want that will fulfill them and create more harmony in their lives. Because when your career isn't a soulful fit, it becomes a soul-sucking experience. So each week we have conversations with inspiring guests and create resources for you to become more confident, resilient, and brave to make the moves you want to make and do it with more ease and grace. So if something strikes a chord during this conversation and you want more information, check out the show notes below, so you can find various ways to connect with my guest and me. So today's episode is a bit of a departure from our typical conversations about career transition, but we're going to weave a thread for you to follow and bring you back to it. So let me ask you a question. What would you do if you felt left out, left behind, like a misfit? My guest felt those things so powerfully that she became radically inclusive and found herself always seeking common ground. Nisha Anand is a boundary buster, common ground creator, and national leader for social and racial justice. Her TED Talk, The Radical Act of Choosing Common Ground, was viewed over 1 million times during the run-up to the divisive 2020 election. Nisha is known today as a leader in cultivating unlikely and unconventional partnerships to create change. She now pushes change makers to dream bigger, design more inclusive movements, and experiment at scale. As DreamCore's CEO, Nisha guides a team of storytellers, organizers, and policy experts working at the intersections of criminal justice reform, green economics, and tech equity to create a better future for all. Who doesn't want more of that? We need more Nishas in our world. I want to bring Nisha's vision to you because we all can use some personal and professional encouragement on dreaming bigger, being more inclusive, and finding common ground. So I want to welcome Nisha. Hello. Thank you for joining us.
Hello, thank you for such a nice introduction. That was great
Oh,
to hear.
yeah. I am so inspired by you. I am so happy to have you here. Thanks so much for joining us.
Thanks. All right,
Okay,
let's talk.
let's get started. I want to start with a little bit of your backstory. Why do you call yourself a misfit?
It's a I actually love the question. No one's ever asked me why I call myself a misfit. I always just felt like a misfit. I grew up most of my life in the 80s in the South. I grew up in Atlanta, Georgia, and it was very much a black and white town there, and I didn't fit in. A daughter of immigrant parents. That was one thing. It didn't feel right. I grew up with my father. Divorce was very common. Living with your father in the 80s was not common. So I also was a misfit there. And then the thing that really stuck out with me, the big dissonance I had in what I was told to be and who I was, Indian, in my family and in our culture, often Indian women are meant to, be pretty and marry well and to be smart enough, to get a good husband. That was not my path. I knew from a young age that wasn't my aspiration. And I wanted to break that mold. So there's this thing of wanting to be everything my parents wanted. I definitely grew up a little bit of a people pleaser and knowing that that wasn't for me. So I was constantly figuring out, where do I fit in? There was one part of me that felt like I didn't belong anywhere, purely a misfit. And then there was the strategy to deal with that, of being left out and left behind, which was the opposite, to fit in everywhere. So I think I discovered my superpower in my youth, that I could actually understand so many different perspectives, because I was quite literally the bridge between the old world and new. I had to translate, America to my parents growing up here, and that ability to be that bridge, to be between worlds, gave me that superpower to fit in almost anywhere. So I'm both a misfit and I feel like I'm a chameleon, both things.
And it sounds like you're a bridge builder.
Yes, I would
Yes.
definitely call myself that now.
Yeah.
I can't say I was always a bridge builder, or maybe I didn't always see myself that way, but now I definitely believe it's one of my biggest callings.
But I think learning to navigate your on your journey of fitting in, you learned to become a bridge builder, and that has inspired you, I think. And
Yeah.
you've inspired me.
Oh, thank you so much. I think about that term bridge builder, and the way you just put it clarified something for me, is that we're all bridge builders. I think that we all navigate quite complex identities that don't always match, and we do it seamlessly, like in who we are. Ha- we're not all just one thing. There's nothing that just describes us. So growing up, I was a punk rock kid. So absolutely rebellious, into punk rock, lied to my parents so I could travel and go to shows. I was also captain of the debate team and I got straight A's. I knew how to fit those in together, but I think we all do. We all actually know how to bring two very different ideas, people, actions, thoughts into one room and navigate it seamlessly. So in that sense, yes, I've always been a bridge builder. I think all of us have that knack. We don't know it. We don't use it. And right now, especially in this climate that's really polarized, I think a lot of us like to forget we know how to do that. We think it's impossible to have a conversation with someone who thinks differently than us.
Right. Right. I wish I agreed with you that we all have the knack, and maybe we all do, but for some of us, maybe the clarity isn't there. Maybe we're not quite sure. Maybe we're still feeling a bit like the misfit and haven't quite figured it out. So I want to get deeper into that conversation as we go along.
Yeah.
But the TED talk that you did inspired me even more. And I'd love for you to share your philosophy about coming together to get big things done. Would you do that?
Yeah. Absolutely. I am. In my TED Talk, I was thinking, how do I describe what we do at my organization, Dream Corps? What makes us a little bit different than any other organization that's working for progress? And it's this philosophy that we're willing to work with absolutely anyone in order to get something done. For me, freedom, for me, that feeling of being left out and left behind, I've dedicated my life to social change. I've worked in the nonprofit sector my entire career, and I know we're going to get into career a bit. So there's definitely stories there of what part of nonprofit and career I've been part of. But my entire life, I've been fighting for to make this country better, to make it better for people that I care about, the folks left out and left behind. And I hadn't been getting, you think you dedicate your life to these things, you'd see some progress. And it was slow going. And I was looking for ways to make a bigger difference in my life. I worked a lot with smaller organizations. I did a lot of local activism, a lot of movement building work. I was a protester. I was a little bit of a of a radical. I've been arrested over a dozen times, um, including a very high profile international arrest as well for different causes. So I've been part of the social change fabric and kind of the ecosystem of how you make change in the world. And I'd seen a lot of different angles, but I wasn't getting to where I wanted to get to. And so when I started this job at Dream Corps, which is now 9 years ago, and I interviewed with Van Jones, who is our founder, and he's a public figure, great visionary, and really the best. He's a great friend and a really strong mentor. So he's pushed me a lot. But in the interview, he told me that we were going to pass bipartisan criminal justice reform. And at that point, I thought it was an oxymoron. Those two words had never been put together, as far as I know, in the history of this country. Bipartisan criminal justice reform. It wasn't an issue that was a both sides issue. It had always come from the left. There was always an explanation that this is about justice. It's about a system that has been racist since its inception. It's been unfairly applying laws to certain people. And it's, this unjust system. That's where I came from. That's how I understood it. But Van walked me through a different take. At that point, he was on a TV show with Newt Gingrich. He was on Crossfire on CNN, which has had many cycles in our lifetime. But at that point, they were the left and right people debating. And he told me that Newt was really interested in criminal justice reform, which sounded bananas to me. I grew up in Georgia. I was a high school senior when the 1994 crime bill was passed, which Newt was Speaker of the House at that time. This was the law that ushered in that era of mass incarceration. So when Van told me Newt wanted to work with us, of course I was skeptical. And he walked me through it. He said, we come at at a justice angle. But the coalition on the right, you have fiscal conservatives who don't want to spend taxpayer dollars for a system that doesn't work. You have the religious right and conservatives on that side that believe in second chances, believe in redemption. They want to see, rehabilitation and those stories of redemption. That's nowhere in the current criminal justice system. And you also have libertarians who don't like this government overreach and don't like the drug laws that are putting people into prisons for marijuana use. So you have three parts of the Republican coalition that want to see criminal justice reform, not for the same reasons as we do, for their own reasons, but can we work with them and get something done? I still doubted it, but we went forward. We went ahead and did it. And now I understand that your motivation does not have to be the same. And in fact, the things we care about, just even me and my family, our motivations for wanting a certain dinner or going to the baseball game or, hanging out with friends, those motivations are different. We still might get to the same goal. And that's what I experienced in working on passing this historic piece of legislation, the First Step Act. We worked with Republicans during the Obama administration to kind of craft what would criminal justice policy look like that all of us could get behind, and it didn't pass. We couldn't get it through during the Obama era. When Trump became president, we had a different question, which was, do we keep working on this And perhaps we can't get all the things we want passed, or do we wait until the administration is different and maybe more friendly to some of these reforms? And Van asked each one of us on staff to think about that and make that decision. And he said, the people who are inside prison cannot wait. So I am not going to wait. They do not care who is in the White House. They want to go home to their house. And that was compelling to me. That's who I do this for. I don't do it to win points. I don't do it to have the optics on our side or to play politics and get a win for the next president versus the current president. I do it because there are people inside who should not be inside, who are suffering and deserve a second chance. That's why I do the work. So keeping the mission first and being willing to work with folks who aren't usually the people we work with in the Senate and Congress and the White House, it was all Republicans. Doing that was so important for the people inside that I was fighting for, that we continued to do it. We passed the law. 87 senators in a Republican-controlled Senate voted for it. And today, 20,000 people are home because this law was passed, because we were willing to work with unlikely allies, work across the aisle, and get something done. And that should be justification enough. I mean, it has been that these folks are home and we have the stories and we've hugged the people who have come home. It is absolutely beautiful. But I also think that argument on waiting until it was better politics has also proven to be an incorrect way to think about it. We waited on a lot of things. And right now, where we have a Democratic controlled House, Senate, and executive, none of the bills are getting passed now, let alone before. And so waiting isn't an option.
Right.
I'm willing to work with anyone to get anything done. That's a long way to say just that point. If I can do it, I will. Yeah.
And you know, I think what you're talking about is, and when you and I first talked, I remember you saying to me, we create the biggest table possible and we include as many voices and perspectives as possible so that you can get big things done.
Absolutely.
And not waiting.
Yeah.
For the time to be right, because it never is.
It's never right. And I think that that piece of it, building the biggest table possible that's radically inclusive, I just don't think it strategically works, or that it's just the right thing to do. I actually think it's the only thing that works for the long term.
Yeah.
So I think it's the right thing to do. You want to have solutions that include the most voices, because then we all have our blind spots.
Right.
You're going to be good at pointing out mine. I'm going to be good at pointing out yours. We need that. That's why we have this push for diversity, equity, and inclusion right now in our country. It is important. You get better products that way. You think better. You want to have that, folks pointing out your blind spots. It works with legislation too. So we want it to have a better law, but also if you include all those voices, it will be a durable law. It won't get overturned. And so building it that way from the start is really important. And this week, it's really hard not to talk about this leaked document from the Supreme Court that could mean that Roe versus Wade will be overturned, which has been law of the land for the last 50 years. And so I think it is imperative to think about that. We have to design to make sure that the progress we have stays the progress that we need.
Yeah. I said at the beginning that this is a bit of a departure for this podcast. We're going to talk about some things we don't usually talk about, but that we're weaving a thread and we're bringing it back. I believe what we're talking about here is essential for human relations in this world today. And we're all in our careers. It matters who we are including, whose perspectives we're listening to, who gets invited to this big table that we create, and in our lives. Mm-hmm. This world needs more people like you and Dream Corps and the people that you are collectively moving forward with the work that you're doing. So I'd like to ask you, you've used those terms radically inclusive and radical common ground. Tell us what you mean by those terms and how can we be more like that in our own careers and lives?
I think it's radical right now because it is scary and it's not smiled upon. And if you step out and say, "Hey, I'm going to work with Newt Gingrich on passing this law," from where I come from, the community I'm part of, which I'm sure if folks haven't figured out, I do identify as left, and not just left, but pretty far left. So in the circles I have always grown up with, in terms of who's in my social media feed, a statement like that will be shamed. You are not supposed to work with the other side. So I think there is a radical stance in just saying you are willing to hear an opinion different than your own. That is radical right now, in this country, and actually in the world. This polarization is not just in the U.S. It's actually spreading worldwide. So I do think it's a radical stance to say I'm willing to listen to somebody who appears to disagree on some really core issues with myself. That is a radical stance. And then when I apply it to common ground, I think there's a way when folks hear common ground, they think that means compromise.
Right.
And for me, that's not what it is. I am always authentic in any room I go into. And that's what people can count on me for, to be my authentic self, to bring in the lens, which I grew up with, that misfit lens, the fact that I will always think about who's left out and less left behind. That is part of what puts me in the progressive camp. I'm looking out for the community as a whole. So if I'm in a room with Republicans, they can count on me to point out things that might feel like racism, and I can point it out in a gentle way because I experience it in a different way. They can count on me to talk about our communities and which communities might be hurt the most by certain ideas. Just like I can count on them to point out things I don't think about. I don't think about individual liberties and rights right away. That's not the first thing on my mind. But it is important. That's how this country works, liberty and justice for all. So if I can bring the justice and they can bring the liberty, that makes it stronger. But right now, I think the other radical thing is that, and I use this example because I think it's very present right now when we talk about the mask debate. Most people don't want to talk to anyone who has a different opinion on wearing masks right now. Masks is a funny word, that extra S. I just realized it. But, I live in the Bay Area. Wearing masks were very much the norm. They still are. Still today, there's still mask mandates inside, our train stations and, things like this. And the argument, I don't want to wear masks, had been avoided. It was nonsensical to think that anyone had an argument on why you wouldn't want to wear a mask. And maybe you still feel that way, and that's fine. But if I get in a conversation with someone who doesn't want to wear a mask, I first look for where I agree. Hey, what's up? I see you're not, you don't want to wear a mask in this closed, tight space. What's going on? I can't breathe. Yeah, that sucks. We are unable to even acknowledge that, yes, it is hard to breathe in those things. Why? Because we're afraid we're going to lose an argument. Or I can't have my kids wear it. They're going to get pimples. Or, they're not able to talk and socialize and they've been isolated for so long. All of that is true. And so for me, I have to acknowledge that that is true. I agree with all of those statements. It does not mean I agree with the conclusion or I act a certain way, but I can at least validate that the experiences and the beliefs are absolutely true. The first time I was able to do this with my dad, our entire relationship changed. My dad is a Republican who loves to argue politics. And I felt like every issue he brought up, no matter what part of the issue, I had to disagree with every single point. Once I realized I could agree with 10 of his points and not agree with 10 others, our conversations radically shifted because then he was able to agree with some of my points. That's the exact same thing that can happen when talking about masks, because there is some common ground to be found. There are ways if you can have that conversation, but we've dug in so much where we won't acknowledge where anyone is right on any given issue. we're having a hard time finding that common ground.
I love what you just said. I love it. Because in any conversation, in any relationship, whether it be in your career or at home, the example of you and your dad, it's perfect. And we so quickly want to disagree. And if we just switch our mindset a little bit and first wonder, get curious about where we can agree or where we can see their point and start there, you're starting from a very different place.
Absolutely.
And
Completely
that's common ground.
Yeah.
That's
Completely
common ground. And that's inclusion,
Yeah.
right? So we are including each other in this conversation where there are certain things we can agree on and other things that we don't, but it radically changes. You're so right. Radically changes the outcome of the conversation, the respect we have for the relationship. I
Yeah.
love that. I think that's such a great nuance that is radically has a radical outcome. I think. I love
Absolutely.
that. I love that. Okay. I remember you telling me about your own career transitions
Mm.
and how that led you to work in this field of finding common ground. But you initially rejected the offer you got to be CEO at Dreamcourt, right?
Uh-huh.
So
I
tell us a little
did.
about that.
There's actually two moments when I have a friend group that I'm with. They talk about the upper limit problem. You think you've reached the upper limit, and so you say no. And I had that twice with this job, actually, when I think about it. The first was when I applied, I had, when I had my kids, I took time off and was just consulting with smaller nonprofits in the area. I had a fundraising background and I was helping fundraise, but I was also I also was taking classes, courses to get certified to be a coach because I thought if I'm going to consult, I should be a coach. Well, anyone who's been through coaching knows, or a coaching training program, you get coached pretty heavily. And during that process as a new mom, I realized I wanted to do something bigger. I wanted to play a bigger game than I had been playing, which was smaller movement work and small activist things. I wanted to play on a national scale. And so I wrote down a list of groups and people that were doing things that looked like what I wanted to do. And I put Van Jones's name on my list. And a week later, a job description came across my desk for a fundraising position for Van. And when I looked at it, I saw there were two positions open. There were two women on his team who were both going on maternity leave at the same time. One was going to be gone for 6 months and come back, and one was going to be gone forever. Both positions were open. Well, my first upper limit problem, I said, I should just apply for the short term one because maybe I still want to be a mom. Maybe I can't do this. Maybe this is too big leagues for me. Maybe I was meant for this and that. So I applied, and during the process, they said, "Hey, you're actually more of a fundraiser. You should apply for this forever one." I'm like, "But what if I, can't?" And that was my first upper limit problem. But I did. I got it. I got hired. I took the one that was that was forever, which now, 8 years later, 9 years later, is forever. And I started this path. But then 3.5 years ago, Van got this opportunity to work at a different organization. And we have built so much at Dreamcore. I was nervous, of course, about leaving. And I could be very happy and content to be I was his chief of staff at that point, to be his chief of staff for quite a while. It was the first time in my life I didn't think about my next move. I was really enjoying this job. And when he got this opportunity, he said, if I leave, I really think you should be CEO for Dreamcore. Would you think about it? And I said, no, right away. because I know what comes with being a CEO. You get a lot of the scrutiny. You get all of the bad things are, your fault. All of the good things really belong to other people. And it's a hard thing to do when we were growing, and stepping into Van's shoes felt like another upper limit problem. How could I possibly do that? This is that imposter syndrome that follows a lot of women throughout their career. And he hung up the phone with me pretty fast. And I've been working with him for years. I knew this was not a happy hang up and on me. And I talked with a few of my colleagues, other women at the organization, and Jessica Jackson. And I'm going to give her credit here. She called me stupid, which is really important, and asked me what in the world I was doing, and that of course I was ready for this. And I called Van back and I said, hey, wait, actually, let's talk about this. And he had a huge sigh of relief. And he said, thank goodness, because if I had put all this work into you for the last, 6 or 7 years, and you were just going to say no that easily, I thought, what have I done? And I realized that was the case. And he's very good at that, building the leadership of all the people that work for him so they can take over, so they can be on their own. And I said, but look, I love being your chief of staff. I'm comfortable in it. And that was the word that changed everything. Yeah. He said, you're comfortable? I never want you to be comfortable in anywhere. You always have to grow. You have to be in that uncomfortable territory. That's the only place of growth. And he never accepts standing still. He's always pushing to grow. Everyone that works for him has to be pushing to grow. And that's when I fully embraced it, that this is the growing edge. It's going to be uncomfortable and hard. And I got to tell you, the first 3 years as CEO, the first year, you're just getting your, Bambi legs, learning how to walk. Second year, when I'm like, okay, time to take on, COVID hits. So my second year of CEO was an unprecedented year to lead. And Bambi legs again, me and every other leader in the world. And now I'm in my third year, getting a little bit fourth year, I have no idea anymore. COVID time is quite bizarre. So 3.5 years, I guess I'm in my fourth year now. It feels good. I can't say I'm comfortable yet, but when it is, then it's probably time for another transition.
I love that story. And there's so many good points that you've just made. And I love what Van said to you. You're feeling comfortable, then it's time for a change. It is time for a change, because now you're just going to be stagnant. Now you're not going to grow. Now you're not going to lead from a real place of leadership, right? Because everybody else will get stagnant and comfortable too. And then the whole organization mirrors you, the leader.
It's very true.
So yeah, that's such good points. Okay, so we end every single episode of this podcast with practical tips and strategies from my guests. It's why I call the show Tips for the Transition. And I think we've just segued really nicely into your tips today. So Nisha, what have you got for us?
Well, I mean, I do think it is a great segue. I think getting uncomfortable is really important. And the tip, and we covered some of this before, that I'd say about getting uncomfortable is to commit to have at least one of these difficult conversations with someone in your life. You might already be thinking who it is, person you've been avoiding talking to about whatever subject. Wade into politics, man. It is an important time for us to seek common ground on politics. And so my tips for this conversation are listen to understand. Do not listen to win. You don't need to prove points right now. My tip would be listen to understand. Where are they coming from? What in their life has led them to this outcome, to this decision, to this way of thinking. Listen to understand. Be bold enough to agree where you can. Find one place, one thing at least. If you can find more, great, to agree. And really see where it goes from there. You don't even have to tell your point of view in the conversation. If it comes that time, do listen to understand, find a place of agreement, and see where that conversation can take you and what's possible.
And I love how you started that. You're probably already thinking about someone that you could strike up a conversation like this with. And, maybe the first person you do that with is maybe a safer person, right? To test the waters if you've
Mhm.
never done this before. But there are probably many people
Yeah.
in your career, in your family, perhaps friends, community
Yeah.
people who and I think it takes practice
Mhm.
to flip the switch for yourself
Yeah.
so that you are, and I love it, actively listening so that you understand where they're coming from and can find that common ground and start from there.
Yeah. I think you're right about who to pick. I'd keep it out of the workplace while you're still practicing.
Yeah.
I think it is probably better to find someone out, and I think, you're also right about that listening piece. We actually do not have to say anything, and it takes, like you said, practice. Some of the words I like to use is to open the conversation and neutralize it from the start and say, I'm not actually like, I don't need to tell you my opinion at all on this. I'm purely wanting to understand because I clearly don't right now. I clearly don't understand where this viewpoint's coming. So I'm really hoping I can just listen and ask questions and find out why. I just want to understand. Say that up front. It gives them permission, and it also encourages you not to say anything, to really try to understand. And then my favorite phrase, if I can't find the understanding that I use often, is, "Oh, I see it a little differently." It
Yeah.
doesn't have to be "You're wrong, you're horrible, you're racist." Those things don't work. It's not helpful. "I see it a little differently" allows there to be room for 2 views, and if I have to walk away from a conversation, that's one of my favorite ones to use. "Oh, well, I see it a little differently." It also encourages them to ask, "Well, tell me how you see it." Right.
And opens the conversation. I love that. I see it a little differently. Um, yeah, you've opened the aperture for me a little bit so that, and that's what it's all about. It is all about welcoming different perspectives and acknowledging that they have the right to exist, right? Their opinion is just as valid as yours.
Mhm.
They may not be the same, but finding the common ground, listening to understand, and taking it from there, seeing where it goes. And remembering that, I love that you said, start in neutral.
Yeah.
Start at that neutral space where you're not at each other's throats about a differing opinion, right? A differing view of a particular situation, but
Yeah.
that you are seeking to understand and to find common ground and to, yeah, I love this conversation. Do you have any other tips for us?
I was thinking about neutralizing the point too, just as you said. I was thinking of other things I've used, just like, "Hey, I just wanna understand." It's
Yeah.
about that being authentic, piece. When people say, "Oh, aren't you compromising?" Part of being authentic, you could open it up with say, "Look, I vote this way, or I think this way. I'm not sure it'll ever change. But, and I don't need you to try to convince me, but I really wanna understand where you're coming from." Say it
Right.
up front, be authentic, like, "Hey, I'm this person." Like, I'm not pretending to not be just to have this conversation.
Right.
Really about understanding. I think there are a lot of ways to have that neutral opening and be authentic with it.
Yeah, and it's almost like saying, I'm interested,
Yeah,
right? I'm curious. I am I want to know more. I want to understand more deeply. I want to see all sides of this. It's like the Rubik's Cube, and you just keep turning it and you see things differently.
absolutely, and, I
Yeah,
mean, we all love talking about ourselves, or usually that's kind of like a common held belief. So, it's a win-win in that way too. You get someone talking about themselves.
right. And you listen, right? And to hopefully hear something that will help to establish common ground or to be included or to include someone else.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And a lot more is possible from there.
That's
So
true. That's so, so true. Nisha, this has been great. I have really enjoyed this conversation with you. As I shared earlier, it is a bit of a departure from any conversations we've had on this podcast before. But I'm so delighted that you came here and shared with us your journey, your feelings of being a misfit, and how that uh, compelled you to put yourself in situations to build bridges, to create bigger tables, to allow for a sharing of different views and finding ways to solve some really big problems. And, I love that you're doing what you're doing. And I think what we can take from it is that in our own little way, we can affect our own world by doing very similar things.
absolutely. And those small things, those small pieces help the whole.
Yeah,
Absolutely. Being
yeah,
able to show that it's possible just one-on-one with people and in your own lives will
yeah.
open up the possibility to the whole world. I want that to be infectious. I really do.
Yeah, creates those ripples.
Yeah.
Yeah. Thank you so much for sharing everything you did today, your tips, your story, and your philosophy. I love it. Thank you.
Thank you for having me on.
So now I want to let everyone know how they can reach out to you, Nisha, so that if they want to chat with you, what's the best way?
Well, first, it's an open invitation to anyone who wants to solve the world's toughest problems, but in a way where, you don't have to polarize folks in order to have progress. Please come and join us at Dreamcore. And our website is the Dreamcore, spelled corps.org. And then, of course, if you want to talk more with me or hear more about what I'm thinking, as you can tell, I like to talk. And that's on the website below, which is my website, nishaanand.org.
That's fabulous. I am sure you will be hearing from a lot of people. So thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you for having me on.
And for those of you who are watching and listening, I appreciate that you're a part of this community. If you enjoyed this episode, please leave a comment or a review. And if you have star ratings where you're watching or listening, just click on a star. Let us know how you feel about it. As I said at the top of the show, I love creating and sharing resources for professional women who feel stuck in their careers. So if something in this episode resonates with you and you'd like a fresh perspective on it, reach out and let's chat. And if you want to connect with Nisha or me, you'll find all the links you need in the show notes below. And I invite you to continue this conversation in my private Facebook group called the Career Transition Roadmap. And the link for that is below as well. So let's meet again here next Wednesday at the same time, 10 a.m. Mountain Standard Time. Because you know what? I believe it's our time to thrive. So let's thrive together. I'm Maria Tomás-Keegan, helping you turn transition into triumph.